And using the chat, there were some questions I asked you when you registered, but I know there's a lot of Project Wild facilitators here, some educators that have been trained, and some Project Wild state coordinators. So there's a lot of familiarity with the activity Oh Dear. So I'd like you to let me know in the chat, take an estimate as about how many times have you led the activity Oh Dear? How many times have you facilitated it for other people? And if it's 0 times, that's fine. But of course, we're talking about the traditional version when you're probably out in a field. So using the chat, type in a number. Hundreds. Okay, so if you're looking at the chat, you're seeing that thus far, for many people, many, many times. And, in part of my role with Project Wild is reworking activities and updating them. And I rely heavily on the input from Project Wild people, educators, field testers, facilitators, state coordinators. I do not have too many opportunities to actually lead activities. I think I've led Oh Dear about 4 times myself. So if you haven't had much experience with Oh Dear, you're not alone. And this version of Oh Dear is especially new. So I'm going to, let's start with I'm going to share the activity, and you may have had a chance to review it already. Again, show me with the chat, how many of you have had a chance to read through the Google Doc titled Oh Dear with 5 Dice Online? Okay. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of yes. Okay, good. Not yet. All right. Okay, so I believe, and help me out by nodding heads or thumbs up or what have you, but can you see right now the Google Doc on my screen as the shared screen? Okay, thanks, Laura. All right, so in this version, what I wanted to do was capture enough content for educators that have had very little experience, as well as those that are well versed with Oh Dear. So we went ahead and included not all, but we included a significant amount of background information about carrying capacity and limiting factors, and instead of asking educators to refer back to the guide. So this activity can stand alone. We anticipate that for most of our Project Wild online versions, there will be activities that you probably will need the hard copy to get the background, and to understand the activity better. So this activity has a pretty detailed set of procedures in their traditional Project Wild format. And how we adapt that to online activities will probably be different in a lot of other activities. But in this case, we're starting with the whole detailed text. And yet this is still somewhat of a scaled down version of the activity that's in the book. Okay, so we're not going to focus too much on this set of procedures now, but if you have thoughts on this document, on the procedures, I would love to have them. So please send them to me. And you can email them to me, that would be best. And before we go, I'll give you my email address. So what I want to do now is share a different screen. So I'm going to minimize that, and I'm going to space out my windows on my screen. And if you haven't done this yet, you probably want to also. But I'm trying to get to 3 windows on my screen: the scorecard, the data sheet, and the dice roller. And I will share that view, and in fact, you may see it now. But are you seeing me reposition all of these? Is that showing yet?
No, it's still on the lesson plan, the oh dear
Okay.
5 dice.
All right. I think I have it now.
Yes.
Does that look better? Okay. Okay. And I know, especially with multiple windows, it starts to get really small. So you're going to need not only to see my screen, but more importantly, you're going to need to have open these documents, because you're going to be working directly on the scorecard, and you're going to be working directly on the data sheet. You may or may not be familiar with how shared documents through Google or other platforms work, but an infinite, well, maybe not infinite, multiple people, hundreds of people could open these documents, the same document using the same URL, and with the setting, with the control sets as such, all of those people could edit it at the same time. And so right now I have the master copy. I'm showing you the master copy, but what you'll need to do is, what I need to do now is make that master copy one that anybody with a link can edit. So I'm going into my settings. Okay. And don't forget, when you're doing this, to have a backup copy that you can go back to, because things happen, as we know. This is a good point also to mention that a big concern for educators using Google Apps and really a lot of shared apps, shared screens, whiteboards, what have you, is typically it's difficult to know the identity of people that are making edits or posting content. Of course, this is a big concern for educators, and it may be a barrier for some teachers and some school districts that just aren't wanting to use this kind of format because of content that might be posted that's inappropriate or possibly sabotage. For example, from a disgruntled, mischievous student. Imagine that, right? Okay, so now what I'm going to ask, just to do a little test run here, is I see the anonymous lemur just clicked in deer number 1, and that's just the test I was looking for. So if you just clicked in, if someone could click in the column 1 for deer 1, and where it says deer 1 at the top, type in your initials. And maybe like, over the 1, you could put your initials. Okay. And in fact, you could go so far as to, well, we could say color code your column, but let's just do our initials. And now I'm going to ask everyone else, there's 21 participants and 20 slots. So someone might be left out. You might find yourself just observing. And if you don't want to, if you'd rather just observe, then don't do this next part. But everyone else, pick a column, type in your initials. In a good case in point, whether intentionally or not, someone put in a red line. The question is, do I have the ability to erase that? If I do, it's not coming easily. Okay, in the meantime, while you're doing that, I'm going to check the chat here. And is anybody having difficulty in accessing the document or typing in your initials? Okay, remember, if you're going to need to open up this link, and if you need that again, let me know.
And if anyone's having a hard time, I actually had to refresh my page after you changed the permissions. So if anyone can't edit.
Ah, great tip. Thank you. When you are leading this activity for others, you know, you're going to want to have a master copy that you have saved, and then make a copy of that, and probably change the name, which I did not do here. I should have changed it to, at the top, oh dear scorecard, copy August 20th, you know, but keep a master copy, and then share the copy that you intend to give everybody editing permission to.
It's interesting. I actually don't see the red line at all on mine, but I see everybody else's edits.
Okay. That is interesting, because on mine, as you might see from my shared screen, there's a red line on column number 7.
Yeah, I can see all the other same changes that are on your shared screen as on mine, but I just not the line, so I'm
Okay,
not sure how that works.
that's good to know. Good to know. All right, we'll give another moment here. So we still have 5 or 6 slots. Maybe we're down to 4 now because those are being filled in. So there's a few more slots if you still want to jump in there before we start rolling dice. Okay, well, we're finishing up here, and I see in our first column, Dear LBC has color coded his or her column for easy access, right? And you can also color code the text that you're putting in. You don't have to. Okay, so in this simulation, we're trying to overcome, we're taking on the role of a deer in a herd, and we're trying to overcome limiting factors, including habitat components, acquiring the necessary food, water, shelter, and space to survive through that season, to survive that year. And then these other limiting factors as listed in the left column. We have to get by fences. We have to survive wildfire. We have to survive hunting from licensed hunters as well as from unlicensed hunters. We may have to cross highways, face other kinds of predators. We may have to overcome disease. And we also may be affected by surprises, by things that can impact our population, that might boost our chance of success or decrease our chance of success, increase our chance of survival or decrease our chance of survival. And this is the limiting factor titled "Oh dear" in the last row under limiting factors. And as you can see in the footnote at the bottom underneath the scorecard, for the "Oh dear" roll, and that is if you get, if the number on each die is the same, you know, like 5 1s, 5 2s, 5 3s, etc., you will add the sum of the dice. Now, if it happens that it's even numbers like 2s and 4s and 6s, like you roll 5 6s, well, then you're going to add the sum. And if it's negative, if it's an odd number, such as 5 1s, 5 3s, or 5 5s, then you're going to subtract the sum. And thank you, Natalie, for that suggestion. I don't even know if you're here, but that was Natalie Elkins had spawned that idea. So this Yahtzee roll is the 5 of the kind. The scoring works differently than how Yahtzee works. Um, all of the scores are simply the sum of the dice, okay? And what you're trying to do is, as you roll the dice, every time you finish a round of rolls, you have to score that somewhere, okay? And so you're going to have to pick one of these rows to score it, and you're going to have to be strategic about where you put it. And that's true in Yahtzee. You strategically decide where you're going to apply your score. And at the end, when you get all of the rows filled for your gear for this season, and I'm going to type in here, this will be year 1. So in the upper left corner of the scorecard, I just typed in 1. In year 1, the threshold points that I set, as you can see down at the bottom of the scorecard, is 125. So you need at least that number. You need a number of points that's equal or greater to 125 to survive this round. Now, after the first year, I, as the activity leader, I can decide what the threshold will be for the next year. Okay, so this is a peculiar part of this simulation. Essentially, I'm playing nature here, playing the part of Mother Nature and saying, now the point threshold is going to be, maybe I'm going to lower it to 100, or maybe I'm going to raise it to 200. Okay, but for the basic procedures, I, as the voice of nature, the decision maker for nature, I'm going to say what that threshold is, and I can ask for your opinion based on the results. You know, why should it be higher? Why should it be lower? All right, now, to do this activity, some people would probably find it easier just to have 5 dice, but we also have this online dice roller. So as you can see on my shared screen, I have the dice roller open, and for each round of dice throws, I get 3 tries, right? And if you're familiar with Yahtzee, you already get this, but here, this is gonna be, you know what, I'm gonna be deer 18 here, so I'm gonna put in ML, that's me. And I'm gonna make my text purple. Okay. Okay, and so here goes my first roll. So let me do a few rolls and then I'll turn it over to you all and you can start rolling. So on my dice roller, and here you might want to take a look at my shared screen here. Okay, so I see I got 3 3s and 2 4s. Well, that's a potential full house. Well, I might be able to get 3 of a kind. So I'm gonna hold on to these 2 3s and these 2 4s. So I click the hold buttons underneath the dice I want to hold. I roll again. I still got a 2, so I get 1 more roll. I'm not going to hold that 2. I'm going to see if I can get it to a 3 or a 4. Nope. So, okay, so I have, my options are 2 of a kind, right? 2 3s and 2 4s, or I could score it as 3s. I could score it as 4s. I didn't get the full house, you know, which would be 2 of one kind and 3 of another kind. So I'm gonna go for two pair. You know what? 2 pairs not an option here. I'm in my poker head, not my Yahtzee head. Okay, so I'm going to score this for 3s, and so for my 3s, under my column here, over on the right, I'm putting in 6, and I could have scored it for 4s, but I think I can do better for 4s later. Okay, now I'm going to clear all, and I'm going to go into my next roll. All right, so I'm going to hold on to my 3s and my 1s, and I'm going to re-roll that 2. Aha, there it is. A full house down here, It's not the best full house because I have fairly low numbers, but I'm going to take it anyway. So I have 6, I have 9 total for that score. So over in my column, I'm scoring a 9. Okay, so that's the idea, right? And how long will it take us all to do these? How many rolls there are? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 11 rolls. It's going to take some time, probably 15 minutes, I'm guessing. Let's find out. So I'm going to turn it over to you. And if you were successful in claiming one of those columns, you can start rolling the dice. And if you want to chat in the chat box, I'll be watching that as well. Feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you have questions or comments. I'll try not to talk too much because I know you're going to be thinking strategically and doing a lot of addition. But if you want to chat, the chat box would be a good way to do that. So the question will come up, can I take out a score that I put in previously? And we're going to say for this version, no. Now, if you want to make your own house rules when you're leading this activity and say, okay, yeah, you can take out an activity and swap in another one, go ahead. But for this round, no. And of course, by the honor system, you need to pick with every time you finish a round of rolls, apply your roll, and you cannot change it after you apply it. Okay, let's see, we have some questions coming in. Are there definitions for students for each of the dice roll terms? Full house, straight? No, the definitions are provided by the leader of the activity, who's expected to have some familiarity with what they mean. So looking at our score sheet, some of that information maybe is intuitive, even if you're not familiar with it. But 3 of a kind, for example, would mean three threes or 3 fours or 3 fives. A full house might be the one that people not familiar with poker don't know. But that's something we could add. Okay, so we could add, what is a full house? What does a 4 dice straight mean? Or maybe we could refer people to a website that would explain that. So making a note. Okay, another question. Do you count all the dice even if they don't figure into your roll? For example, a 4 dice straight. Do I count all the 4s or all 5? And you didn't miss that explanation, Jen. I failed to explain it thoroughly. You count all the dice. So, for example, if you got a 4 dice straight and you had 4 threes and you also had a 2, then your score would be 13 for the 4 dice straight. So you're always going to count. You're always going to count all 5, the sum of all 5 dice. And if for some reason you cannot use your roll, if it does not apply to any category, then you'd pick one row and put in a 0. Jen, I think that's how I wrote the activity. I think that's what I said. So I need to go back and check that. If you've already put in numbers and you discounted, you discounted some of the dice and not all of them, don't worry about it. Just keep going. So that's something I need to watch for. Okay, another question. We can't change natural effects. Oh, this is a comment. It's not nice to mess with Mother Nature. Agreed. Okay. Um, there is a big human influence on nature, and that's partly where the oh dear role comes in. There's a question for predators and things like that. Do you want a high or a low roll? You always want the highest roll you can get. So to overcome the possibility of mortality from a predator, then yeah, if you can get a 4 dice straight that helps you overcome predators, you want the highest 4 dice straight you can get. And that represents that you are really successful in overcoming predators. All right, it looks like we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 people who have been successful in getting their numbers in. And so I'm going to be watching those 8 rolls, those 8 deer. And when you get to a stop, when you all get your rolls completed, then we'll go on to the next step. And so what I want you to do is as you finish all rolls, for example, deer number 15, deer MB, if you could add up your total and record that amount in the row at the bottom that says total points. And for those of you, if you don't have a chance to get all your rolls in and I say time's up, when we get to that point where I say time's up, go ahead and start adding up what you do have. Who knows, maybe you'll meet the threshold. This is a comment from Anne. In Yahtzee, you only get to count and add the number of the applicable dice, of the 2s, and not all 5 dice. That's good to know. And that may be one of the future edits to this version. And while we're finishing up our rolls, I wanted to let you all know that the first version of this activity using this Yahtzee style oh dear approach was from a Project Wild facilitator who recently relocated to Indiana, Andrea Behrman. And she's one of those super enthusiastic wild ones out there. And she's also worked on other kinds of online simulations. I'm looking forward to spending more time with some of the work she's done and others. And if you've been adding up the applicable dice as you do in Yahtzee, don't worry about it. Okay, and so, all right. So far, everyone who's completed their rolls has survived, right? And so we're gonna go about another 30 seconds, and then I'm gonna say time, and you're gonna start adding up your points if you haven't already done so. If you have already added up your points, I want you to think about what the next season might be like. It's looking like our, we're starting off with a herd of 11. Let's say we have 11 deer, because I'm counting 11 because there's really 11 rows of results. Okay, well, 10 seconds left. Okay, and go ahead and stop rolling. If you have any blank cells, you can leave them blank and start adding up your points if you haven't already done so. So looks like we have 9 deers here, yeah. And I think we may have one deer that did not survive, and we have 8 survivors. And I'm thinking deer number 10 did not. Well, maybe they did. It's close. Okay, so we're going to move on now, and we're going to look at the data sheet. Okay, so I have this on my screen. I'm going to share it, which I think you should be able to see now. I have the data sheet expanded a bit, and I'm going to drop in the numbers. So, and this is something too that if everyone had it open, they could drop in their own. If you have this data sheet link open, I think I'm going to have to do it because I don't think I have it shared to where you can enter the data. But so, okay, deer 1, we have 167 points. Deer 2, 136. 3, 161. 4, you know what? Well, yeah, I'm going to count deer 4 as number 3. Actually, let me change that. That could cause a problem. Okay, deer 4, we have 161. Deer 5, 127. Deer 6, 148. Deer 7, 114. Deer 8, 185. Deer 9, nothing. Deer 10, we'll come back to that. Deer 11, nothing. Deer 12, 171. Deer 13, 161. In deer 15, we have 159. Okay, so, and then for deer 3, Well, there were 10 points recorded. Let's see what happens. Okay, and for deer 9, 0, this is assuming that there was a deer 9, which is different than what I said earlier, but I'm dropping those numbers in now. And deer 10, I don't know what the total is. I'm going to guess it was, let's say it was 150 for the purpose of understanding how this works. Okay, so here's a graph of our population, number of deer, and the year. And so actually this, I have it mislabeled now that I see it, but it's the number of deer. This is these numbers, this was the threshold really. So instead of number of deer, I'm going to have to rework that to how many surviving deer, how this graph plays out. This is incorrect, and I apologize for that. I didn't catch it till now. But it does show you how at least you can use Excel or Google Sheet to build in a graph that graphs it as you put in the numbers. So let me work on that. But let's say that this graph shows our deer population over the year, and this is now the opportunity to debrief on the results and get ready for the next round. Okay, so we could talk about what happened in, well, some basic graphs interpretation. According to this graph, anyone, what year was it where the deer population took a dive? All right, yes, so in year 3, right? And so where my cursor is, and give me a thumbs up, or if I want to make sure you have the same shared screen. Let me check. Yep, I think you do. Okay. All right, so where the cursor is, yes, that would be year 3, right? And what are some of those factors that might have caused the dip in year 3? Well, again, this graph, it's not a good reflection of how the simulation on the scorecard is working. So we're kind of jumping ahead, but what is one of the limiting factors that you encountered that you had trouble, that you got a low score on, for example, or that many deer got a lower score on? Maybe it was overcoming predators, or I see, for example, deer 7 in getting 4 of a kind to overcome the poacher, the unlicensed hunter. They scored fairly low. They only got 8, right? So, could that be a factor here? All right. Okay, so going back, what I want to get this activity to, and this will be my goal for the next time, is that this graph I'll take this out and we'll have this scored, and there'll be time for educators to help students build such a graph that represents years, doing multiple rounds of keeping a scorecard. This scorecard is intended to represent 1 year. Okay, so what I'm going to do is turn off the sharing. So anyone with a link is now a commenter. And I'm going to try to clear the results. I'm going to have to work on that because now it's not working for me. So what it means is I'm going to have to go back and use an earlier version. Because I should still have the ability to edit. Yep, there we go. Okay, so it's just going slow. So for everybody else, the sharing has been turned off, or I should say the editing capability has been turned off. All right. And what I can do is I can open a new scorecard altogether, or in this case, I'm going to just rename it. Okay. And so let's give it one more try. We don't have too much time left, but I would like you to, now that you have experience rolling, go ahead, start rolling, and let's see what happens in the next round. But this time, I'm going to increase the threshold. Let me ask you all, what would you say would be, what's going to happen in the next year when all the deer in a herd survive? What might happen? Is it going to change? Is that population of deer going to interact with the factors that limit its population in a different way? How will the availability of food, shelter, water, and space affect that deer population differently in the next year? Okay. In fact, I invite you to type in an answer, or if anyone wants to unmute and tell me what you think. We had most of the deer this year survive. What might happen in the next season? And also a related question, what do you think I should set the threshold at? Okay, so in a year where most of the deer survive, it's quite possible that it might be more challenging in the next year to overcome the limiting factors. If the amount of food, water, shelter, and space stays the same as the previous year, but the population goes up, well, it might mean that not as many deer are successful in obtaining those items. And so I'm going to reset the threshold. Any suggestions? 175, okay, I like it. Okay, so start rolling. Pick the column that you did. Oh, sorry. I need to share. I need to change the change it so everyone's an editor. Okay, now you have access. You can start filling in your column. So pick the same column you had last time.
And you always add the sum of all the dice, right? So even if you only have 1, you add all the dice.
Right, that's right. Add all the dice. And I'm going to look back at that, but just adding the applicable dice could be a good option, especially if that's how it's done in Yahtzee.
Because I was just thinking, if I only get 1, but I get a bunch of 5s and 6s, I'm gonna get a higher score.
That's true, and yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, I'm okay with doing that, but I mean,
Well,
it's a matter if you think
right,
about that as a deer.
right, yeah. So for now, just add all the dice and build that into your strategy. And while you're doing that, I'm going to look back at, see if I can find that. And those of you who read the activity through, you may have read it more recently than I have, but I'm looking at the scoring. Yes, so that's what I said is the sum of all 5 dice. And if I'll need to think about it, and if you may have ideas on this too, but what are the downsides of allowing some of the dice to be scored? And maybe there aren't any. Maybe it's more intuitive and easier to do that way. Okay. So there's a request that I explain the note on the bottom of the scorecard. And so that note is for the oh dear roll, and this is the last limiting factor, the oh dear roll, that's if you get 5 of a kind. And this represents effects that can happen, or phenomena that might boost the deer population or decrease the deer population. And so for the oh dear roll, when you get 5 of a kind, if your number is even, that is, if you get 5 twos or 5 fours or 5 sixes, then you add the sum of the dice. However, if you roll negative, you get 5 ones or 5 threes or 5 fives, then you would subtract the sum. So I see our dice rollers, they've finished 5 rounds of dice rolling, so they're about halfway done. So this gives us an idea that we need about, once students become familiar with the procedures, it's going to take probably 10 minutes to get through a single year. Okay, so this is a lot different than the traditional in the field simulation, where you might finish a round in 30 seconds, or you might pause at times and debrief a bit. You might spend a minute on a year. So this is pretty different. And it's one of the challenging things about this format is you're having to invest a lot of time. And so one way that this activity faces that challenge is allowing, once students become familiar with how the dice rolling works, well, then you can have them do, you complete the dice rolling on their own. It might be as homework, or it might be in small group work. So during the synchronous instruction, when you have everybody, you might invest more time in understanding what the activity is about, what the rules are, getting your windows open on your screen, making all of that work, and recording the data for 1 or 2 rounds. But then also explaining to students that their job is, they give them access to the master scorecard and have them make copies and fill out results. And it could be that one student completes all of the roles for each of, say, 10 or 20 deer, and that's their homework, is do the roles for 10 rounds and record all on the same scorecard. So in this case, the scorecard would not represent a year, but it would represent, well, it would represent, it could represent a year. It would represent the success of 10 deer over the year, but they're all done by one student. And then you could take the results from each of the separate students and count the results of one student for 1 year and another student for another year. Or you could leave the scorecard, use the same scorecard and just keep it available. And, their homework might be to complete the roles for year 2 on their own, and then to open the scorecard for year 3 and complete those using the same column, and then maybe do one more, complete the scores for year 4. And that's probably how I would do it if I was doing an online training that had more than one meeting. I would say to facilitators, okay, I'm posting scorecards for 4 years, and I want you, before our next meeting, is to complete the roles and only enter in the numbers for your deer. And I see the comment from Anne regarding the typo. Thank you for that. Okay, so we're getting some scores rolling in here. And wow, so gosh, so I think some of our deer have have learned a lot in their young days and are becoming more successful at obtaining their habitat components and overcoming limiting factors, because there's some higher scores, right? Um, and we have a very high survival rate. Okay, um, so for the next round, we're going to bump that up. We're going to bump it way up, and I'm thinking probably somewhere around 220, at least 200, right? But with the deer population that's successful, we can guess that the deer population would probably increase. And you know, the increase in the deer population doesn't have a strong representation in this simulation, but we can talk about it and say, you know, that a healthy doe may have, in the course of a year, with enough food, water, shelter, and space, and if that deer overcomes the other limiting factors, it would be common for them to have two baby deer that survive, right? And so the population in a couple of years might double with this kind of survival rate. And what would happen if it doubled? What would happen to this, the available, how would the available habitat components be acquired? There would be more competition among the deer in the herd for those components, right? Okay, so let's talk about, I just explained one reason why this simulation is different than real life, right? The simulation, we don't see directly an increase or decrease in the deer herd. Now, given time and multiple sessions and the homework assignment of multiple roles or just a long online deer session, we can start to chart how many deer are surviving. But that fluctuation in the population right now is not too obvious. Whereas in real life, you know, deer mortality and survival might be more obvious to the deer, to wildlife managers, and the effect on the deer herd. What other ways is this simulation different than reality? It's 4 o'clock now, so if anyone needs to head out, I certainly understand. We're going to wrap it up.
You kind of always have the same number of resource chances. It doesn't really get limited. Like if you added or took away the different number of dice you were rolling, 4 dice versus 5 or 7 dice, you'd have different chances for different numbers. So I feel like that's a little bit different.
Okay. And so when we roll the 5 dice, sometimes we're holding some, right? And so in a sense, that's taking some away, but you're meaning something else. Like maybe there could be conditions where you lose the 5 dice. You only get to roll 4 dice or 3.
Yeah, because that would give you some differences on the limitations of the habitat or whatever. And you could even make changes for, like, on predators, you only get 2 dice, but on food, water, space, and shelter, you get 5, or however you wanted to handle making it some different changes.
And that could be a great way to approach it, especially if we can find or make an online dice roller where you can easily set the number of dice being rolled. My guess is there are online dice rollers where you can do that. I haven't seen any yet. I've looked at about 3 or 4 different sites. There's lots of Yahtzee sites. Okay. Any other ways come to mind on how this simulation is different than what happens in the real world? So I wanted to point out before we go that one of the variations here is challenge students to find a different way to reset the threshold number after the first year or after the first couple of rounds, rather than the activity leader saying, okay, I'm going to now set it at 200. You have to get 200 points to survive the next year. Is there a way to make that automatic based on some predetermined set of rules? So challenge the students to determine what those rules are. You know, for example, they might come up with an algorithm that says, for example, if only 30% of the deer survive, well, then the survival threshold drops down by 70%. Or if 50% of the deer survive, well, then for the next year, the survival threshold is 50% of what it was for the previous year. And there's other ways they might propose. They might propose increments to where, you know, if say you're playing with 15 students, well, if 1 to 3 deer survive, then the threshold will be 50 points. And if 4 to 6 deer survive, the threshold point may be 60 points, you know, where they come up with increments. All right. And so that's, to me, one of the really challenging places where this simulation is, it doesn't really represent very well what happens in nature when the activity leader plays Mother Nature and decides what the threshold is. But maybe if there's some more automated way where students explain their rationale for why they chose that threshold, then not only are they talking about how is the simulation different than nature, but they're talking about the model. They're talking about, you know, the accuracy of the model and why they made the model the way they did. Okay, so feel free to email me comments as I get more into the weekly-ish Wild Learning Lab. I'm going to be using a form that educators fill out to give me feedback, similar to what we do with field testing. My hope is that that next week with Dragonfly Pond, I think that activity is far enough along to where there's not going to be as many revisions needed. There's some serious flaws currently in Oh Deer Online, but I think that one educators will find that it's more ready to go if they're comfortable with using Google Slides and Zoom. So thank you all. You're welcome to stick around for another 5 minutes if you want to chat. Otherwise, I assume we'll be ending the recording, and thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.